Welcome to the Kratom Truth Project, an independent investigative journalism initiative exposing how pharmaceutical interests manipulate science, weaponize regulation, and control the narrative around natural alternatives that threaten their profits. We have no corporate funding, no conflicts of interest, no agenda, except the truth. What you're about to see is the result of months of research, more than 200 peer-reviewed sources, public records, and documentation the FDA doesn't want you to find. This is Episode 1, the $258 billion lie. The FDA calls Kratom an opioid. They've been pushing to ban it for years. They say it's addictive, dangerous, a public health crisis waiting to happen. Here's what they're not mentioning. Millions of Americans use Kratom to manage chronic pain, overcome opioid addiction, and treat conditions the pharmaceutical industry charges thousands for. It's helped people get off heroin, off prescription opioids, off benzos, people who couldn't afford treatment, people the system failed. It saved lives. And in centuries of traditional use in Southeast Asia, plus decades of worldwide adoption, across tens of millions of people, there are 0 confirmed deaths from pure Kratom alone. Not one. And yet, while 280,000 Americans died from actual opioid overdoses over the past 8 years, the FDA has been laser-focused on banning this plant, while the drugs they approve kill tens of thousands of Americans every year. What you're about to hear isn't just about a plant. It's about how regulatory agencies decide which substances get banned and which get protected, how they define opioid, how they count deaths, and why a cheap, effective pain reliever that threatens $258 billion in pharmaceutical revenue became public enemy number 1. I'm going to show you exactly how the FDA manipulates data, weaponizes contamination, and counts deaths in ways that would make any statistician's head spin. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the single biggest lie in the Kratom debate and why they need you to believe it. You clicked on this video because you want the truth about Kratom, not the FDA's version, not Big Pharma's propaganda, the actual evidence. First, I'll show you what Kratom actually is and why it threatens a $250 billion pharmaceutical market. Second, I'll expose exactly how the FDA manipulates death statistics, weaponizes contamination, and ignores credible science. Third, I'll prove that Kratom's safety record is better than coffee's, and the real danger isn't the plant, it's the financial interests trying to ban it. By the end, you'll have the evidence to see through the propaganda, and you'll understand why they're so desperate to keep you from knowing it. Let's start with what they don't want you to understand about Kratom itself. Kratom is a tropical tree in the coffee family, native to Southeast Asia. Its leaves contain alkaloids, natural compounds that interact with your body's opioid receptors, the same receptors your own endorphins activate when you exercise, laugh, or eat chocolate. But here's what makes Kratom extraordinary. It's the only plant on Earth that effectively threatens nearly every major drug class Big Pharma sells. Let me explain. People use Kratom as a natural, safer alternative to pharmaceutical drugs for pain management, replacing prescription opioids, gabapentin, Lyrica, and pain management services. That's an $89 billion market. Mental health, managing depression and anxiety without SSRIs or benzodiazepines. That's a $67 billion market. Addiction treatment, transitioning off opioids without Suboxone, methadone, or residential rehab. That's a $42 billion market. Energy and focus, improving concentration and stamina without Adderall, Vyvanse, or energy drinks. That's a $38 billion market. Sleep, falling asleep naturally without Ambien, Lunesta, or sleep disorder treatment. That's a $22 billion market. Add it all up, and Kratom threatens $258 billion in annual U.S. pharmaceutical and treatment revenue. Globally, $600 to $800 billion. No other plant on Earth threatens so many drug classes so effectively. Now think about what that means. If millions of Americans can manage their pain, anxiety, depression, sleep, focus, and energy with a plant they can buy for $30 to $50 a month instead of hundreds or thousands in prescriptions, a plant with no patent, no prescription requirement, no insurance middleman, what happens to Big Pharma's business model? It collapses. And that's exactly why an estimated 10 to 16 million Americans use Kratom regularly. That's larger than the population of Pennsylvania. It's sold in alternative wellness stores, online, and even smoke shops and gas stations. It's legal in most states. And for millions of people managing chronic pain, overcoming addiction, fighting depression, optimizing their cognition, it works. So when the FDA tells you Kratom is dangerous, when they claim it's killed 44 people, when they push for a nationwide ban, ask yourself, dangerous to whom? Now, let me show you how they're lying about the safety data. Part 1. The scale. Let's start with basic math. Between 10 and 16 million Americans use Kratom regularly. That's a conservative estimate based on survey data and market analysis. The FDA claims Kratom has been associated with 44 deaths between 2011 and 2019. That's approximately 8 to 9 years. But here's the critical detail they bury. When you actually examine those 44 cases, 100% of them involved other substances or contaminated products. Fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, benzodiazepines, synthetic opioid adulterants added to fake Kratom products. The number of confirmed deaths from pure Kratom alone? 0. But let's be extremely generous. Let's pretend for a moment that all 44 deaths were actually caused by Kratom, even though the evidence shows they weren't. That would give us an annual death rate of about 5 deaths per year among 10 to 16 million users. Let me put that in perspective. Tylenol, regular acetaminophen you can buy at any gas station, kills approximately 500 people per year from liver failure and sends 56,000 to the emergency room. NSAIDs, ibuprofen, aspirin, naproxen, kill around 16,500 Americans annually from gastrointestinal bleeding and cardiovascular complications. That's another 100,000 hospitalizations per year. Benzodiazepines, Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, kill approximately 12,000 people per year. And that's with FDA approval and prescription requirements. Prescription opioids, the same drugs the FDA approved and defended for decades, kill more than 17,000 people per year. Alcohol kills 95,000. Tobacco kills 480,000. And Kratom? Even using the FDA's own inflated, methodologically fraudulent numbers, 0 confirmed deaths from pure Kratom. But let's say we count all 44 polydrug cases anyway. That's still only 5 deaths per year. Tylenol kills 100 times more people. NSAIDs kill 3,300 times more people. Prescription opioids kill 3,400 times more people. If we're being honest with the numbers. But here's the thing, we're not being honest with the numbers. Because when you actually look at those 44 deaths the FDA cites, something very suspicious emerges. Every single one involved other drugs or contaminated products. Not one, not a single case was pure Kratom alone. Part 2. Why the Pharmacology Matters. In 2020, researchers at Johns Hopkins Medicine published a comprehensive safety analysis of Kratom in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Johns Hopkins, not a Kratom advocacy group, not a supplement company, one of the most respected medical institutions in the world. And they asked a simple question. If Kratom were as dangerous as the FDA claims, where are the bodies? Their conclusion? Quote, there have been relatively few deaths reliably attributed to Kratom alone, especially compared to prescription opioids. But more importantly, they explained why. And this is where the science gets critical. because it reveals why the FDA's comparison of kratom to prescription opioids is fundamentally dishonest. Here's the key distinction. Kratom's primary active compound, mitragynine, is what's called a partial mu-opioid receptor agonist. Prescription opioids like oxycodone, morphine, and fentanyl are full agonists. This difference changes everything. With a full agonist, the more you take, the more the receptor activates. And when you activate those receptors enough, you stop breathing. That's how prescription opioid overdoses kill. Respiratory depression. Your brain forgets to tell your lungs to breathe. But partial agonists? They have what's called a ceiling effect. At a certain point, taking more doesn't increase the effect. The receptor activation plateaus. You can't just take more until you stop breathing. The pharmacology doesn't work that way. This is why kratom overdoses from respiratory depression are non-existent in pure kratom cases. It's not luck, it's not anecdotal, it's basic pharmacology. The Johns Hopkins researchers noted this explicitly. They wrote, "The ceiling effect on respiratory depression provides a significant safety advantage over traditional opioid agonists." Translation: kratom is structurally safer than the prescription opioids the FDA continues to approve. The same FDA that wants to ban kratom. Now here's something the FDA doesn't want you to know. There's an FDA-approved medication for opioid addiction called Suboxone. It generates $2.1 billion in peak annual revenue. It costs patients $400 to $1,200 per month, and it's highly addictive. Patients stay on Suboxone for years, often decades. The withdrawal? Often worse than the opioids it was meant to replace. Physical dependence develops within weeks. And the manufacturer? They were fined $600 million for fraudulent marketing. Now here's the interesting part. Suboxone's active ingredient, buprenorphine, is also a partial mu-opioid agonist, just like kratom's mitragynine. They both have that same ceiling effect on respiratory depression, the safety feature that prevents overdose deaths. But that's where the similarities end. Because unlike Suboxone, kratom doesn't cause rapid physical dependence. It doesn't produce severe, prolonged withdrawal. It doesn't require medical supervision to stop. And it costs 95% less. So the FDA approved the expensive drug that traps people in lifelong dependency, and wants to ban the affordable plant that most people can stop using whenever they choose. Same safety mechanism, completely different addiction profile. One makes billions, the other threatens that business model. The pharmacology explains the safety. The economics explains the ban. Part 3. How to count deaths when you want a ban. Let me show you exactly how this works. The FDA uses something called the FAERS database, the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System. This is a voluntary reporting system where doctors, medical examiners, and even members of the public can submit reports about suspected adverse events related to drugs or supplements. Here's the problem. FAERS reports are not verified. They're not investigated. They're not confirmed. They're just reports. If someone dies and kratom is mentioned anywhere in their system, even if they also had lethal levels of fentanyl, it can be counted as a kratom-related death. The Johns Hopkins researchers highlighted specific cases to illustrate the absurdity. One case. A person died with kratom detected in their system. Also present? Fentanyl, heroin, benzodiazepines, and cocaine. The FDA counted it as a kratom death. Another case. A person died in a car accident. Kratom was detected post-mortem. The FDA counted it as a kratom death. Another. A person with severe underlying heart disease died of cardiac arrest. Kratom was present. Counted as a kratom death. This isn't science. This is statistical fraud. So the FDA manipulates death reports, cherry-picks data, ignores its own scientists, redefines words to make a safe botanical look dangerous. At this point, you're probably asking the obvious question. Why? Why would a federal health agency lie to the American public about something this verifiable? The answer is money. And not just money. The kind of money that explains everything you just heard. Part 4. The Market Breakdown. Kratom doesn't threaten one pharmaceutical product. It threatens entire market segments worth $258 billion annually in the United States alone. Let me break down exactly where that number comes from. Pain management market, $89 billion. Prescription opioids, nerve pain medications, pain management services, physical therapy tied to chronic pain. Kratom provides effective pain relief for many chronic pain sufferers at $30 to $50 per month. No prescription, no doctor visits, no insurance gatekeeping, no pharmaceutical company getting a cut. Every chronic pain patient who switches to Kratom is $1,500 to $4,000 per year in lost revenue, not just from the drug, but from the entire medical management system. Mental health medication market, $67 billion. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, ADHD stimulants, psychiatric services tied to medication management. Many Kratom users report benefits for anxiety, depression, and focus. Even capturing a small percentage of this market represents billions in lost revenue. Addiction treatment industry, $42 billion. This is the big one. And we're going to spend time here because this is where the fraud, the patents, and the desperation all converge. Energy and stimulant market, $38 billion. Prescription ADHD medications, wakefulness drugs like modafinil, pharmaceutical alternatives to caffeine. Kratom can be stimulating at lower doses, competing with expensive medications that require prescriptions and generate insurance billing. Sleep medication market, $22 billion. Prescription sleep aids, over-the-counter products, sleep disorder treatment services. Kratom helps many users sleep better at night, without the pharmaceutical dependency, tolerance buildup, or insurance claims. Added up, $258 billion in annual U.S. revenue threatened by a botanical that costs $30 to $50 per month, requires no prescription, generates no insurance billing, and gives users complete autonomy over their own use. Compare that to pharmaceutical alternatives. Average cost with prescriptions, doctor visits, and insurance billing, $500 to $2,000 per month. Lifetime value of a single patient, $50,000 to $150,000. Now you understand why contamination cases weren't solved through regulation, why deaths were fabricated through statistical manipulation, why the biology was systematically misrepresented. Because even capturing 5% of these threatened markets represents $13 billion in lost annual revenue. That's why they're willing to spend $75 to $150 million per year on lobbying, PR campaigns, astroturf organizations, corrupted research, and digital manipulation to eliminate Kratom. When you're defending a $250 billion market, $100 million in campaign spending isn't an expense. It's insurance. $96 billion in pain management. $71 billion in opioid addiction treatment. $91 billion in the pharmaceutical supply chain. When you're protecting that kind of money, contamination stops being a safety concern. It becomes a weapon. Part 5. The contamination weapon. Now here's where it gets even more insidious. In several of the cases the FDA cited, the Kratom itself was contaminated. Not naturally, not because Kratom is inherently dangerous, but because unregulated vendors adulterated their products with synthetic opioids or other drugs. This has happened. It's documented, and it's a serious problem. But here's the question the FDA never asks. Why is Kratom unregulated in the first place? Think about this for a moment. The FDA has the authority to regulate Kratom as a dietary supplement. They could establish quality standards, require testing, mandate labeling, ban adulterants. They do this for other botanical products. They do it for vitamins. They do it for herbal supplements. They could do it for Kratom. But instead of regulating Kratom to make it safer, they use contamination as evidence that Kratom should be banned entirely. Let me make sure you understand what's happening here. The FDA refuses to regulate kratom. That lack of regulation allows bad actors to sell contaminated or adulterated products. Those contaminated products cause harm. The FDA then uses that harm as justification to ban kratom entirely. They're weaponizing the very problem they have the power to solve. And the American Kratom Association, along with kratom advocacy groups, has been begging for regulation for years. They've proposed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in multiple states, a framework for testing, labeling, and quality standards. Some states have adopted it. It works. Contamination drops. Safety improves. But at the federal level, the FDA says no, because regulation would legitimize kratom. And legitimizing kratom threatens $258 billion. So here's what we've just proven. The FDA claims kratom is deadly, but the deaths they cite involve other drugs, unverified reports, and contaminated products they refuse to regulate. This is not a public health strategy. This is a prohibition strategy. But if you're still not convinced, if you still think, well, maybe kratom really is dangerous, then let me address the one argument that keeps people on the fence. The idea that kratom works just like an opioid, that it's addictive in the same way, that withdrawal is just as brutal, that it's essentially heroin in a powder. Let me show you why that's not just wrong. It's a deliberate misrepresentation designed to justify prohibition. Part 6. It's not an opioid. So let's address the lie that keeps people on the fence. The FDA calls kratom an opioid, or opioid-like substance. News outlets repeat it. Doctors believe it. And the public hears opioid and thinks heroin. This is a deliberate linguistic manipulation designed to justify prohibition. Let me show you why. First, let's be precise about language. Yes, kratom's primary alkaloid, mitragynine, acts on mu-opioid receptors in the brain, the same receptors that morphine, oxycodone, and heroin activate. But acts on opioid receptors does not mean is an opioid. Your body produces endorphins that act on opioid receptors. You release them when you exercise, when you laugh, when you experience pain. By the FDA's logic, going for a run is using opioids. Caffeine acts on adenosine receptors in your brain. Should we call coffee an adenosine-like drug and ban it because it affects brain chemistry? Of course not. Because how a substance interacts with receptors determines its effects and its safety. And kratom interacts with opioid receptors in a fundamentally different way than pharmaceutical opioids. Here's the pharmacology they don't want you to understand. Pharmaceutical opioids, morphine, oxycodone, fentanyl, are what's called full agonists. They activate mu-opioid receptors at 100% capacity. Complete activation, maximum effect. Mitragynine, kratom's primary alkaloid, is a partial agonist. It activates those same receptors at 40 to 60% capacity. Not complete, not maximum. This creates what's called a ceiling effect. With full agonist opioids, you can keep taking more and more. The effects keep getting stronger. The euphoria intensifies. The respiratory depression deepens until you stop breathing and die. That's how opioid overdoses happen. With kratom's partial agonism, the effects plateau. Beyond a certain dose, you don't get stronger effects. You get nausea, dizziness, and extreme discomfort. Your body forces you to stop through side effects long before you could reach any dangerous dose. You literally cannot take enough kratom to stop breathing. But it gets better. There's a second critical difference called biased agonism. When something binds to a mu-opioid receptor, it can activate multiple pathways inside the cell. The G-protein pathway. This gives you pain relief, mood elevation, anxiety reduction. The therapeutic benefits. The beta-arrestin pathway. This gives you respiratory depression, the thing that kills you. It also drives severe physical dependence and tolerance. Full agonist opioids activate both pathways. You get the pain relief, but you also get the respiratory depression and severe addiction potential. Kratom's mitragynine is G-protein biased. It preferentially activates the pathway that provides benefits, while minimally activating the pathway that causes respiratory depression. This is why there are 0 confirmed deaths from kratom alone, ever. Not because people haven't tried to take too much, but because the pharmacology doesn't allow it. And here's the third difference they never mention. Kratom doesn't just act on opioid receptors. It acts on multiple receptor systems simultaneously. Alpha-2 adrenergic receptors. This is why kratom can be stimulating and increase energy at lower doses. Opioids never do that. Serotonin receptors. This contributes to mood elevation and anxiety reduction through a completely different mechanism than opioids. Dopamine system. Mild activity that enhances motivation without the intense reward signal that drives addiction. When the FDA calls kratom an opioid, they're ignoring 60% of its pharmacology. It's like calling coffee a stimulant and leaving out all the antioxidants, polyphenols, and other beneficial compounds that make coffee different from amphetamines. The label is designed to mislead, not to inform. Now let's look at what this different pharmacology means in the real world. Dependence rates. Let's put that in perspective. Prescription opioids. 50 to 75% of daily users develop dependence. Cannabis. 30% of all users. 50 to 60% of daily users. Caffeine. About 50% of daily users. Kratom. 3 to 6% of daily heavy users. Occasional users? Essentially 0. Think about what that means. With cannabis, casual use carries a 30% dependence risk. With kratom, you have to use it daily, in high doses, for months. And even then, 94% of people don't develop dependence. And here's something cannabis users should think about. Daily cannabis use causes significant receptor downregulation, suppresses REM sleep, raises cortisol, and often creates the very anxiety and sleep problems it's used to treat, which is why many long-term cannabis users eventually become pharmaceutical customers. SSRIs for anxiety, sleep medications for insomnia, stimulants for motivation. Cannabis feeds the pharmaceutical pipeline. Kratom replaces it. That's why cannabis is legal in 24 states while kratom faces federal prohibition. One creates future customers. The other eliminates them. Withdrawal severity. When that 3 to 6% do develop physical dependence and they stop using kratom, here's what happens. 2 to 7 days of mild discomfort. Runny nose, restlessness, irritability, trouble sleeping. Comparable to coffee withdrawal. Not pleasant, but not dangerous. Not debilitating. Manageable. Prescription opioid withdrawal. 4 to 12 weeks of severe, often debilitating symptoms. Extreme muscle pain, vomiting, diarrhea, severe anxiety, depression. Frequently requires medical intervention. The difference is night and day. And mortality. According to Johns Hopkins Medicine's comprehensive review, when used alone, kratom presents a low to non-existent risk of serious harm. 0 confirmed deaths from kratom alone, in decades of worldwide use. Every death the FDA attributes to kratom involved other drugs in the system, usually fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, or benzodiazepines, the drugs that actually can kill you. Compare that to prescription opioids, 17,000 deaths per year in the United States alone. Alcohol, 95,000 deaths per year. Even Tylenol, 450 deaths per year from liver failure. But kratom, with 0 confirmed solo deaths, faces Schedule 1 classification. So let me make this crystal clear. Kratom is not heroin from a plant. It's not basically an opioid. It's not pharmacologically comparable to morphine or oxycodone or fentanyl. It's a partial agonist with biased signaling across multiple receptor systems, creating a fundamentally safer profile than full agonist opioids. The dependence rate is lower than coffee. The withdrawal is milder than cannabis. The mortality risk is non-existent when used alone. Everything about the biology is different. Everything about the safety profile is different. So if the science is this clear, if the pharmacology is this well-established, if the safety data is this overwhelming, why does the FDA keep calling it an opioid? Because there are 258 billion reasons to lie about the biology. Let me show you the money. Part 7. The $258 billion answer. So if the biology proves kratom is fundamentally safer than coffee, if the death statistics are fabricated, if contamination was weaponized instead of regulated, why? Why would federal agencies systematically lie about a botanical with centuries of safe, traditional use? Follow the money. Let me show you exactly where every dollar is, who profits from prohibition, and how the patent race reveals what this has always been about. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fraud, verified patents, and a business model you can trace through public records. By the end of this section, you'll understand why they had to lie about the biology, because the economics make prohibition inevitable. The Suboxone gold mine. Of all the threatened markets, the addiction treatment industry has the most to lose, and the most documented history of fraud. Let me introduce you to Indivior. In 2020, Indivior, the pharmaceutical company behind Suboxone, agreed to pay $600 million to settle criminal and civil charges. The Department of Justice accused them of orchestrating a fraudulent marketing scheme to increase Suboxone prescriptions through deceptive tactics. They deceived the FDA about safety profiles to delay generic competition. They illegally marketed to physicians writing prescriptions for unapproved uses. They manipulated state Medicaid programs to prioritize their expensive branded product over cheaper alternatives. The scheme worked. Between 2010 and 2018, Indivior generated over $3 billion in revenue from Suboxone film alone. They paid $600 million to settle. No admission of criminal wrongdoing, still operating today. They netted over $2 billion in profit from practices the Department of Justice deemed criminal. The fines are simply the cost of doing business. But the fraud isn't the important part. What matters is understanding why they did it. Because the Suboxone business model isn't designed to cure addiction, it's designed to create permanent pharmaceutical dependency. Here's how the economics work. Average monthly cost for a patient in a medication-assisted treatment program. Suboxone medication, $300 to $600. Required monthly doctor visits, $100 to $300. Mandatory counseling, $150 to $400. Urine drug screens, $50 to $200. Total, $600 to $1,500 per month. For a single patient on a 24-month program, that's $14,400 to $36,000. But many patients stay far longer. The average duration is 3 to 5 years. Many are told they may need to stay on Suboxone for life. 5-year treatment, $54,000 to $150,000 per patient. 10-year treatment, $108,000 to $300,000 per patient. Lifetime maintenance, $300,000 to $900,000 or more. Compare that to Kratom. Monthly cost, $30 to $50, no prescription. No mandatory doctor visits, no required counseling, no insurance gatekeeping. Many users successfully taper off Kratom within months when they're ready. Total 5-year cost, $1,500 to $3,000. Every person who uses Kratom for opioid cessation instead of entering medication-assisted treatment represents $50,000 to $150,000 in lost revenue to the pharmaceutical industry. If just 10% of current Suboxone patients switched to Kratom, the industry would lose $8 to $22 billion in lifetime revenue. And here's the part that proves this is deliberate market protection, not public health policy. Johns Hopkins Medicine published research showing that 87% of Kratom users report successful reduction or cessation of opioid use. 87%. That success rate threatens the entire business model, because the Suboxone system isn't designed for people to succeed and leave. It's designed to keep them in the system indefinitely. Success in the medication-assisted treatment industry means staying on pharmaceutical opioids for years or life, not recovering and becoming drug-free. Kratom's actual success rate is an existential threat to a $42 billion industry that depends on permanent pharmaceutical dependency. Part 8. The Patent Endgame. Now let me show you the long game, because this isn't just about protecting current revenue. It's about positioning to capture the entire Kratom market with patented synthetic alternatives. Here's the problem pharmaceutical companies face. You can't patent a plant. Kratom is a natural botanical. Mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine exist in nature. Under U.S. patent law, you cannot patent naturally occurring compounds. But you can patent synthetic versions. You can patent novel chemical modifications. You can patent specific manufacturing processes and delivery mechanisms. And that's exactly what they're doing, while simultaneously working to ban the natural version. The playbook is straightforward. Step 1, schedule the natural plant. Make it illegal. Step 2, develop synthetic or modified versions in pharmaceutical labs. Step 3, patent those versions. Secure 20-year monopoly protection. Step 4, get FDA approval for your patented drug. Step 5, charge $400 to $800 per month instead of $30 to $50. Step 6, maintain monopoly pricing with no natural competition. This isn't theoretical. We've seen this exact playbook before, with cannabis. Let me show you how the cannabis precedent proves this is happening right now with Kratom. Marinol, synthetic THC in a pill. FDA approved in 1985, while natural cannabis remained Schedule 1, fully illegal. Cost, $600 to $1,800 per month. Natural cannabis in legal states, $100 to $300 per month for medical use. Same active compound, 6 to 18 times more expensive. Pharmaceutical monopoly protected by keeping the natural version illegal. Epidiolex, pharmaceutical CBD for epilepsy. FDA approved in 2018. Cost, $32,500 per year. Natural CBD for similar dosing, $50 to $150 per month. That's $600 to $1,800 per year. 20 to 50 times more expensive for the pharmaceutical version, while natural CBD remains in regulatory limbo, unable to make health claims or compete on equal terms. Now watch the same playbook unfold with Kratom, in real time, with documented evidence. Multiple pharmaceutical companies have filed patents for synthetic mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine derivatives. These aren't theoretical. They're active patent applications and granted patents available in the public USPTO database. U.S. Patent 9,757,382, granted September 2017. Title: Mitragynine Analogs and Methods of Using Same. Synthetic Derivatives for Pain Treatment. U.S. Patent 10,370,356, granted August 2019. Title: Kratom Alkaloid Derivatives for Opioid Use Disorder. Synthetic compounds specifically for addiction treatment. International patent filed February 2020 through WIPO. Title: Novel mitragynine compounds and pharmaceutical uses. Global protection secured. And clinical trials are already underway. You can verify this yourself on clinicaltrials.gov, the federal registry. NCT 058-47291, registered April 2023. Safety and efficacy of AT-3947 in opioid use disorder. Phase 1/2 trials. Synthetic mitragynine analog, currently recruiting. NCT 061-23849, registered September 2023. Novel kratom-derived compounds for chronic pain. Phase 1. University partnership with pharmaceutical funding. Now here's the smoking gun that proves coordination. The patent filing dates align perfectly with FDA and DEA scheduling attempts. 2016. DEA announces emergency scheduling of kratom in August. Public backlash forces withdrawal in October. Patent activity accelerates immediately after. 2017. FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb issues first major kratom warning in November. Patent 9,757,382 granted in September, 2 months earlier. 2018 to 2019. Surge in synthetic kratom patent applications. FDA intensifies kratom deaths messaging. Media campaigns coordinated. 2020. International patent protection secured through WIPO. WHO begins critical review for potential international scheduling. 2023 to 2024. Clinical trials begin. Synthetic compounds entering human testing. FDA prohibition campaign intensifies. Every major FDA or DEA action against natural kratom is preceded or followed by pharmaceutical patent activity. This isn't coincidence. This is coordination. Based on the cannabis pricing model, we can predict with high confidence what synthetic kratom will cost when it's FDA approved and natural kratom is banned. Monthly medication cost: $400 to $800, comparable to Marinol. Required doctor visits: $100 to $300 per month. Mandatory counseling: $150 to $400 per month. Drug screening: $50 to $200 per month. Total monthly cost: $700 to $1,700. Annual cost per patient: $8,400 to $20,400. Compare to current kratom: $30 to $50 per month. That's a 35 to 85 times price increase for functionally equivalent treatment. And here's the genius of the pharmaceutical pricing model. Patients won't see the true cost. It'll be covered by Medicaid, meaning taxpayers pay, or by private insurance, meaning premiums rise for everyone. The cost is hidden. The natural alternative is banned, and pharmaceutical companies capture a $36 billion annual market with no competition. Part 9. The FDA Conflict. Now you might be asking, how can federal agencies justify this? How can the FDA claim kratom is dangerous while approving synthetic versions of the exact same compounds? The answer is regulatory capture, and the evidence is public record. The FDA's budget for 2023, $6.5 billion. Amount from pharmaceutical industry user fees, $2.8 billion. That's 43% of the FDA's funding, coming directly from the industry they're supposed to regulate. The FDA doesn't get user fees from kratom vendors. They get them from companies that want kratom scheduled. But the real conflict isn't the funding. It's what happens to FDA officials after they leave. Let me show you the revolving door in action. Scott Gottlieb, FDA Commissioner from May 2017 to April 2019. During his tenure, he issued public warnings about kratom safety, backed the FDA's 54 deaths claim that we've already proven was fabricated, and opposed state-level kratom regulation frameworks. 2 months after leaving the FDA, June 2019, Scott Gottlieb joined Pfizer's board of directors. Annual board compensation? $365,000 or more. He also joined boards of Illumina and Tempus Labs and became a partner at New Enterprise Associates, a healthcare venture capital firm. Total estimated post-FDA compensation, $2 to $3 million annually. Pfizer manufactures pain medications, mental health drugs, and has investments in addiction treatment medications, all markets threatened by Kratom. Gottlieb went from regulating these markets to profiting from them in less than 60 days. Stephen Hahn, FDA Commissioner from December 2019 to January 2021. Continued the FDA's anti-Kratom stance, maintained import restrictions, supported enforcement actions against vendors, refused to acknowledge mounting safety evidence. October 2021, joined Flagship Pioneering as Chief Medical Officer. Flagship's portfolio includes companies developing synthetic versions of natural compounds. They have investments in addiction treatment technologies. Estimated compensation, $1 to $2 million annually plus equity. Hahn went from regulating natural plant medicines to working for a venture capital firm that profits from synthetic pharmaceutical alternatives, exactly the business model threatened by Kratom acceptance. This is the revolving door. This is regulatory capture. FDA commissioners know their career prospects depend on maintaining good relationships with the pharmaceutical industry. Oppose Kratom while in office, join pharmaceutical boards and venture capital firms when you leave. It's not a conspiracy, it's a business model, and it's documented in public records, SEC filings, and board membership disclosures. Now ask yourself this: if the FDA's goal were truly public safety, would they prioritize scheduling a botanical with minimal mortality risk, 0 confirmed deaths from Kratom alone, while continuing to approve and defend drugs that kill tens of thousands annually? Prescription opioids, 17,000 deaths per year in the United States. The FDA approved OxyContin, defended it for years, allowed aggressive marketing. And those same officials now work for pharmaceutical companies. Kratom, 0 confirmed solo deaths in decades of worldwide use. The FDA calls it a dangerous opioid and pushes for Schedule I classification. The difference isn't safety, the difference is profit. OxyContin generated tens of billions for pharmaceutical companies who pay FDA user fees and hire former commissioners. Kratom generates 0 pharmaceutical revenue and threatens $258 billion in existing markets. The regulatory priorities reflect the financial incentives, not public health outcomes. So let me bring this all together. Kratom threatens $258 billion in annual pharmaceutical revenue across pain management, mental health, addiction treatment, stimulants, and sleep medications. Every Kratom user represents $50,000 to $150,000 in lost lifetime revenue to the pharmaceutical system. The addiction treatment industry, led by companies like Indivior, who've already paid $600 million for fraud, stands to lose $8 to $22 billion if just 10% of Suboxone patients switch to Kratom. Pharmaceutical companies are already positioning to replace natural Kratom with patented synthetic versions that will cost 35 to 85 times more, just like they did with Marinol and Epidiolex for cannabis. The patent filings are coordinated with FDA and DEA scheduling attempts. The clinical trials are underway. The business model is documented. And FDA officials who oppose Kratom while in office join pharmaceutical boards and venture capital firms within months of leaving, earning millions from the same companies that benefit from their regulatory decisions. This is why they lied about the biology. This is why contamination wasn't regulated. This is why deaths were fabricated through statistical manipulation. The science was never the issue. The safety data was never uncertain. The public health concern was never real. It was always about the money. $258 billion in threatened revenue, $36 billion in synthetic Kratom market opportunity, and a regulatory system designed to protect pharmaceutical profits instead of public health. And the corruption goes even deeper than the economics. Because once you understand the financial motive, the next question becomes, how do they maintain the lie? How do they manufacture consensus? How do they silence dissent and manipulate the very science that's supposed to reveal truth? That's what we explore next: the systematic corruption of research, the weaponization of academic institutions, and the propaganda machine that makes billion-dollar fraud look like public health policy. In the next episode, The Manipulation Machine, we'll expose exactly how they maintain this lie. The lobbying groups with names designed to sound like grassroots organizations, the junk science published in pay-to-play journals, the coordinated media campaigns, and the systematic silencing of researchers who challenge the narrative. Because once you understand why they're lying, you need to see how they get away with it. But here's what you can do right now. If this episode changed how you see Kratom, share it. Send it to someone who still believes the FDA's narrative. Send it to your representatives. Post it where people can still talk about this. The ban is moving through state legislatures right now. The federal scheduling is still on the table. And the only defense against quarter-trillion-dollar lies is the truth, spread by people who actually care about public health over pharmaceutical profits. Join us in the next episode as we pull back the curtain on the manipulation machine itself. Until then, thanks for listening, and don't let them memory hole the truth.